So we're months into the coronavirus pandemic right now, and the impact on our national health and economy is devastating, but the ultimate damage is yet to be determined. Governments across the world are grappling with how to respond, and the United States government is no exception. So things have been coming at such a fast clip. Let's talk about what Congress has done in just the past 2 months. So phase one was the Coronavirus Preparedness and Response Supplemental Appropriations Act, enacted March 6th. It gave about $8 billion, mostly to help health agencies respond to the crisis. Phase two, the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, provided $100 billion, mostly to support individuals directly impacted by the pandemic. Phase three, the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, was the largest economic recovery legislation in the history of the United States. $2.3 trillion in loans and grants to businesses and not-for-profits of all sizes, direct payments to individuals, and a number of tax provisions intended to ease the economic burden on individuals and businesses. But as we knew at the time, $2.3 trillion wasn't enough. The Paycheck Protection Program, which had $350 billion to give out to small businesses, was tapped out in a matter of weeks. So Congress and the administration quickly came to agreement on what I'll call phase 3.5. Enacted Friday, April 24th, the bill adds another $500 billion to the almost $2.5 trillion already passed. So let's look at what was included in this most recent legislation. $310 billion for the Paycheck Protection Program, so it can start giving money to small businesses again. The program opened for applications Monday, April 27th. The bill included $60 billion for community banks and what are referred to as underbanked businesses, an additional $50 billion for Small Business Administration emergency disaster lending, $10 billion in grants under the Emergency Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, or EIDL, $75 billion for hospitals and healthcare providers, and an additional $25 billion in funding for COVID-19 testing. The scale of these programs and having to distribute so many benefits in a matter of days is mind-boggling. So we shouldn't be surprised at some of the problems the government is facing. The scale of the Paycheck Protection Program, having to give out almost $2 million in loans in just a couple of weeks, means it's having a hard time keeping up. If you had a pre-existing relationship with an SBA-approved lender, you were golden. But if you didn't, you probably missed out. New money means new loans, though I bet that money will probably run out pretty soon as well. Antiquated unemployment insurance systems are also having a hard time keeping up with the historic number of people applying for more generous unemployment benefits Congress provided in the CARES Act. So that's 4 big bills in just 2 months. And it appears the administration and Democrats came to some agreement on what comes next. Democrats sought more in the most recent legislation, but apparently obtained assurance from the President and Secretary of the Treasury, Mnuchin, that there'd be a number of important provisions in phase 4. So what they're looking at right now includes infrastructure provisions, investments in roads and bridges. There's a surface transportation bill that's got wide support in Congress, but the current crisis has shined a light on shortcomings in our information technology infrastructure, especially in rural areas. So I'd expect some additional investment there. There's also interest in incentives for restaurants, sports and entertainment venues that have been particularly hard hit by the crisis. The president has expressed interest in a payroll tax cut, which would basically mean around a temporary 4 to 8% pay raise for most working Americans. And funding to address state and local revenue shortfalls and other needs. State governments say they'll need at least between $500 and $700 billion to weather the revenue shortfalls they're suffering. So we'll be watching the negotiations closely. One weird thing to keep in mind is actually how these votes get done in the middle of a global pandemic. So unless they have unanimous consent, House and Senate votes have to be in person. The Senate has been able to vote unanimously so far, but because some members insisted on roll call votes, the House had to convene in person. It implemented staggered voting to pass the most recent legislation. There was some controversy over some members not wearing masks or observing appropriate social distancing. Planned efforts in the House to allow for proxy voting have been stymied, so unless alternate plans are made and agreed to, social distancing efforts will stall work in the Congress during the crisis. The House and Senate are currently scheduled to be back in session May 4th, but it's unclear whether protective guidelines will prevent that from happening. But as you can see, these new realities haven't prevented Congress from acting quickly. This next phase may be tougher to get agreement on, but everyone will be interested in taking action as the nation continues to suffer. So stay safe, everyone.